I took a few days off from the pod, and while I was gone, it seemed like a lot happened for the Orioles. Not just that they went 6-1 with a four-game mop over the White Sox and then taking 2 out of 3 from the Red Sox this week, but also a lot of news and notes. Dean Kremer to the injured list. They made a trade with the Brewers and much, much more. So I'm going to catch up on it all coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast.
You are Locked On Orioles, your daily Baltimore Orioles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, Orioles fans. Today is Friday, May 31st, 2024, and welcome back into the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Connor Newcomb, and coming up on today's episode, we are going to kind of get into everything that I missed while I was gone for the first 3 days of this week from the pod after getting married over the weekend. There was a good amount of Orioles news and notes, not just Orioles games that I missed, but Orioles news and notes that I missed as well. So we're going to get into all of it. Dean Kremer going to the injured list, kind of the fallout from that with, of course, John Means and Tyler Wells on the IL with him. We'll talk about the trade the Orioles made, acquiring Thyago Vieira from the Milwaukee Brewers. His Orioles debut didn't go so hot. We'll talk about how it could get better and why the Orioles made that deal. And then a couple other of minor moves, news and notes, and get you ready for the Rays series this weekend. That's all coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast, which is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 with any winning $5 bet. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started today. So it's news and notes from everything that I missed. So you might think, well, Connor, I've heard about some of this stuff, and that will be true. You would have heard about some of this stuff, but wanted to give you my take on some of the things that I missed with the Orioles while I was gone. And we start with Dean Kremer, who was placed on the injured list back on Friday. And this is just adding to the list of Orioles starting pitchers who have gone on the IL this year. The O's have already had 5 starting pitchers hit the IL at some point this season, and they've got 3 of them currently on the injured list, with Dean Kremer joining John Means and Tyler Wells. And of course, Kyle Bradish and Grayson Rodriguez, who are currently healthy, have both spent time on the injured list at some point this season. Now, there's a pitching injury epidemic across Major League Baseball. This is certainly not just an Orioles issue. And the nice part has been, at least knock on wood for now, they haven't gotten the Tommy John news on anyone. There hasn't been a super long-term injury. We'll kind of see what the outlook looks like for Means and Wells. Not a lot of great news on that front, but in general, it's still a little bit concerning, but the pitching depth has been great. I mean, you have to give a huge shout out to what Cole Irvin and Albert Suarez have been able to do, kind of stepping into these roles. But right now, it is Dean Kremer who is on the injured list. They placed him on the IL on Friday with a right tricep strain. He wasn't very good in his most recent start. That was Monday night in the Orioles' loss in St. Louis against the Cardinals. And Brandon Hyde said that Dean felt the pain during that start, but it wasn't like crazy bad, nothing to take him out, nothing to say, oh, he needs to immediately go on the injured list. But they knew it could have been an issue. Essentially what happened was he tried for the next couple of days through his recovery to kind of wait it out, see if the pain would go away. And it seems like it kind of didn't. And so therefore the Orioles waited until Friday when Dean was scheduled to pitch again Saturday against the White Sox. And they decided, okay, he has not recovered well enough to make this start. He's still feeling something. Let's go ahead and put him on the injured list. And the way the Orioles are treating it, the way the Orioles are talking about it, kind of feels similar to how they treated the Grayson Rodriguez shoulder injury a few weeks ago, where, they waited until kind of right before his next start. They said, he's not just ready. They put him on the IL. They didn't panic. They said it's not long-term. He should be okay. And Grayson was on the 15-day IL, and I think he spent maybe 18, 19 days total. It was like 3 weeks at the most on the IL, and then he was right back. And remember, took a no-hitter into the 6th in his first start back from the injured list, like seemingly came back quickly and was fine. And hopefully that happens for Kremer. Now, because he last pitched May 20th, the IL stint was retroactive to May 21st. What that means is if a player, gets dinged up and doesn't play for a few days and you're kind of trying to decide, should we put him on the IL? Should we not put him on the IL? As long as he hasn't appeared in a game, his IL stint can be retroactively basically set to the first day in which he didn't play. So although Kremer was placed on the IL Friday, the 15-day IL time actually started on Tuesday, May 21st, which means he would first be eligible to return on June 5th. That is on Wednesday. So theoretically, Kremer could come back and start Wednesday's game for the Orioles. Now, there's no guarantee he'd be back right after the 15 days, rearing and ready to go. But what we do know is Kremer has been with the team the entire time. He stayed with them in Chicago. He's come back to Baltimore with them. He's been in the dugout for every game. He is there. Brandon Hyde said earlier this week, he's just rehabbing with the team, and everything Hyde has said has been positive about Dean Kremer. It was the same thing with Rodriguez a few weeks ago. Now, again, no doctor. I don't know what's going on with his tricep, but to me, I'm not super worried. It feels like this could be the Grayson injury. Hey, 3 weeks, maybe a month at most, and then Dean Kremer is back in the rotation. Now, he's kind of been just solid Dean Kremer this year. 50 innings over 9 starts, 4.32 ERA, 24% strikeout rate, 8% walk rate, and his 41% ground ball rate this year is a career high. Now, he's been getting hit pretty hard on average. He's got almost a 13% barrel rate against him, which is kind of a concerning number. But the rest of the hard hit stats, that's just kind of the usual Dean Kremer that we've seen throughout his career since he made his major league debut with the O's back in 2020. He's never going to be an ace, but if you've got Dean Kremer as your number 5 starter, you're generally feeling pretty good about your starting rotation. And that's what I think the Orioles have right now, kind of a typical number 5 starter who's going to eat some innings, going to have some good starts, going to have a few clunkers because he does pitch to contact and he gets hit hard. And sometimes when you square him up, he's going to give up some runs and some homers. And we've seen that this year as well. But overall, he's an important piece on your team. Now, on this group, do you want Dean Kremer starting a playoff game? Probably not. And we saw what happened when he did start game 3 of the ALDS last year, but he's an important part of just getting you to the playoffs. Now, the prognosis maybe doesn't seem as good for Means and Wells, who are also on the IL. John Means with the elbow and forearm strain, and he's getting a second opinion. Usually when you get a second opinion, it's not because your first opinion was a positive outlook. So that's a little concerning for Means. Tyler Wells, Brandon Hyde said this week that he has been cleared to start playing catch. He is actually down in Sarasota at the Orioles spring training site right now, but hasn't been cleared to start a throwing program. The Orioles don't have an update on that. That's a little concerning about Tyler Wells and his elbow. But I feel like Kremer could be back soon, and that's what we hope for. It doesn't seem like the Orioles are panicking too much. Now, obviously, there was a pretty easy choice to put in Kremer's rotation spot, and that was Albert Suarez, who ended up making that start for the Orioles on Saturday in Chicago. Now, Suarez had those 2 amazing starts for the O's when he first came up. Then he had one kind of iffy start, and then he was moved to the bullpen when the Orioles got healthy, and he pitched pretty well in like a vast number of different roles out of the Oriole bullpen and had a sub-2 ERA, and then was inserted back into the rotation Saturday. He was not fully built back up. It was kind of a similar thing to Cole Irvin on Monday, where he started after being in the bullpen for a little bit. Suarez was built up for only those shorter outings, so he could only give the Orioles really 80 pitches, but he used those 80 pitches to give them 4 scoreless innings in a really key spot start on Saturday. The Orioles ended up coming back and winning that game against the White Sox. 4 innings, no runs, 2 hits, 3 Ks, and 2 walks. You'll take that every day from a spot start. And you have to feel like now that Suarez probably knows he's back in the rotation, that he should be a full go this weekend against the Rays. Now, as of this recording here, we're sitting here about 7:30 p.m. on Thursday, and I'm doing one final check here as I record, but the Orioles had not yet announced their starting rotation for the weekend, and oh wait, they just announced it, so never mind. And now we do know Albert Suarez will get at least another start in the Orioles rotation. He's going to start tonight's game 1 against the Tampa Bay Rays. That's what he was lined up to do. That would have been Kremer's spot. So Suarez stays in there for now. I know there's some questions about, could Cade Povich or Chase McDermott come up and make one of these starts instead? I think the Orioles like what they're getting from Albert Suarez right now. And so I'm perfectly fine with him staying in that role. And just, he's a great depth option for the Orioles to have. Now, speaking though of McDermott and Povich, obviously those guys you go to if there's any further injury. The hope is that Kremer comes back quickly, and at the very least, you probably move Suarez back to the bullpen, and he still becomes your number 6 starter / your depth guy. But if there's, any kind of other injury, or even if the Orioles still do want to go to a 6-man rotation, because remember when the Orioles were healthier, when they had Means and they had Kremer, Brandon Hyde was talking about a lot, hey, we might go to a 6-man rotation in June. The Orioles had the off day on Thursday, but starting today, 17 consecutive days with a game, they only have one single off day in the month of June. And that's why Hyde talked about maybe doing a 6-man rotation just to keep his starters a little fresher as they go through a really tough month of June where they play a lot of good teams as well. So if they even want to go to that, they'd have to go into the depth. Now, Bruce Zimmerman is kind of your next guy with big league experience. He's currently on the injured list in AAA, so he's not an option. It's not like he's pitching amazingly anyway. So after that, you're really looking at Cade Povich or Chase McDermott, the top 2 pitching prospects right now in the Orioles system, both pitching fairly well in AAA Norfolk. Those are the next 2 guys. And John Mioli wrote a good piece this week at the Baltimore Banner talking about how the Orioles are in this midst of all these games with barely any off days. And if Dean Kremer or John Means or both have a little longer absences than we think, they could go to Povich or McDermott just to make a spot start. Like maybe they'll go to a 6-man rotation, but maybe at some point here in the middle of June, the Orioles just call up Povich to start one game just to give everybody else a little bit of a breather and then send him back down. Like that could completely happen as well. And he's been pitching well enough to get that spot in the majors at some point. And I do think it was a good point by John Mioli that could happen sooner rather than later for those 2 talented young arms. Now, in terms of the corresponding moves for Dean Kremer, they made kind of a flurry of roster moves on Friday. Jonathan Heasley, the right-hander, was also optioned back down to AAA Norfolk at the same time Kremer was put on the IL. Heasley had come up to the roster earlier in the week. He had pitched in that game against the White Sox, the first game of the series, where he pitched a good 8th inning and then fell apart in the 9th, and the Orioles almost blew a 6-run lead. Heasley wasn't going to be available for the weekend anyway because of how many pitches he threw, so they sent him back down. He's got options. He will be back. Remember, he had given up only 1 run in 20 innings in AAA before he got the call-up. He's pitching well. It was just a tough break for him. He will be back in the majors with the Orioles, but they recalled 2 pitchers. Now, Nick Vespi was recalled to the roster. He was sent back down without pitching. That is kind of the classic Nick Vespi over the past few years, and you feel for him, but, at least he's pitching well enough to get that call up at some point. But also, it was a call up for Dillon Tate, who did make this Orioles opening day roster. But, although he was pitching okay, the results were okay. His velocity was way down. The O's were concerned, and they sent him back down to AAA on April 29th. Now, he didn't pitch a lot in AAA. He was in Norfolk for 25 days, and he only pitched in 7 games in 25 days. That is a lot of rest. It was 7 innings, 3 runs, 5 hits, 5 Ks, no walks, a hit batter, and a homer. And the velo was ticking up a little bit. That's what the Orioles were concerned with. Seemed like they were giving him more days off to kind of rest his arm, work on some things, get some velocity back. Well, Dillon Tate came back and had a sensational first relief outing back on Saturday against the White Sox when he went 7 up, 7 down out of the bullpen with 4 strikeouts and got 7 whiffs on 8 swings against his sweeper, which was just tremendous. Like the best breaking ball I've ever seen Dillon Tate throw was on Saturday in Chicago. And all of a sudden, his sinker velocity started going up. He was up to 92.7 on Saturday. He was averaging 91.8 miles an hour before he went down. Remember, he was easy 94 to 96 pre-arm injury with the Orioles in 2022. He threw a pitch at 95 on Saturday. That was good to see. Then he threw the scoreless inning on Monday. Sinker average was 93.4. Then he threw the scoreless inning on Wednesday to secure the Orioles series win over the Red Sox. The average sinker was up around 94. And all of a sudden, the velo is back. The stuff looks better. And Dillon Tate, now that he's come back, as long as he can hold that velocity, might be here to stay in the Orioles bullpen, which could be a gigantic lift for a bullpen that has certainly had its struggles, especially in the middle part at times this season. That is big for Dillon Tate, and he's going to stick for now. But I mentioned Nick Vespi got recalled Friday and just did not stick, was shortly after that sent right back down to AAA. And the reason why Vespi didn't stick this time is that the Orioles made an outside addition to their bullpen. They made a trade with the Milwaukee Brewers on Saturday, acquiring the right-handed pitcher Thyago Vieira in a small deal. So coming up next, We're going to talk about Vieira, what the scouting report looks like for him, and what his role could be if he does find a way to stick in this Orioles bullpen. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is brought to you by FanDuel. Fun time for sports right now. It's not just baseball. It is winner take all time in the NBA and NHL. And FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, to bet on money lines, to bet on player props, and so much more. And I got to tell you right now, I'm loving Albert Suarez. Everything he's done for the Orioles this year has been great. He's got a 1.53 ERA. The Orioles are facing Aaron Savali, who has not been good for the Rays this year. How about a little Orioles money line on a Friday night over at FanDuel? So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook.
You are Locked On Orioles, your daily Baltimore Orioles podcast. Part of the Locked On podcast.
So for the O's, it was a small deal, but a deal nonetheless, and a trade we are going to talk about. Again, I mentioned it. They made the deal officially on Saturday as they picked up right-hander Thyago Vieira in a deal with the Milwaukee Brewers. Now, who is Thyago Vieira? First of all, it is not Thyago Vieira. It is Thyago Vieira. He is Brazilian, and that is the kind of #1 big thing about him. Vieira, who debuted in 2017 in the big leagues with the Seattle Mariners, is one of only 5 players born in Brazil to play in Major League Baseball, and he is the first Brazilian player to ever wear the Orioles uniform at the big league level, which is pretty cool. And in Portuguese, the TH sound makes a ch, and that is Thyago Vieira, the 31-year-old right-hander, who I mentioned debuted with the Mariners, and the Orioles now his 4th Major League team. Pitched briefly with the Mariners in 2017, then a couple of years briefly with the White Sox, kind of up and down from AAA and the bigs in 2018 and 2019. Then he went to Japan, and for 3 years, from 2020 through 2022, he pitched as one of the best relievers at times over in Japan. The stuff was electric, and that was enough for the Milwaukee Brewers to sign him to a minor league deal before the 2023 season. Now, he went to AAA with the Brewers, and in about 38 innings, had a 3.35 ERA, 32% strikeout rate, 9% walk rate. They said, let's call him up in September and see what he's got. He only threw 3 innings for the Brewers at the big league level last year out of the bullpen. Didn't make the playoff roster or anything, but was impressive nonetheless. And he returned to the Brewers and made the opening day roster out of the Milwaukee bullpen here in 2024. And it didn't go great. He pitched 22 1/3 innings for the Brewers with a 5.64 ERA, allowed 25 hits, did strike out 25, but walked 13 and allowed 6 homers in those 22 innings of work. And last week, he was DFA'd by the Brewers because they were getting a little healthier, and Vieira just wasn't cutting it. They weren't really using him in high leverage spots. It was a very similar reason why the Orioles DFA'd Mike Baumann, is that like Vieira wasn't terrible, but they weren't trusting him in any high leverage, and they just didn't have any other options. Vieira is, of course, out of options, so he could not be sent to AAA. So the Brewers had to make that move. And what the Orioles did is they jumped the line. We talked about it, how the Orioles traded Mike Baumann to the Mariners after DFAing him because the Mariners said, hey, we're too good. Mike Baumann isn't going to make it to us on waivers because the waiver order is reverse the order of your record. So they said, let's just jump in and offer the Orioles a player to trade for him. That is exactly what the Orioles did with the Brewers to go and get Vieira. So the final trade was the Orioles get Thyago Vieira. They also get a 19-year-old right-handed pitching prospect named Enoris Rodriguez, who had been in rookie ball for 3 years, with the DSL for a couple years, then was in the Arizona Complex League this year. And in 3 years in professional baseball, 83 innings, a 3.67 ERA, 95 Ks to 37 walks. Definitely a pitching project at just 19 years old. But the Orioles send to the Brewers 26-year-old right-hander Garrett Stallings. And some Orioles fans may know the name, some may not. He's never appeared in the big league. Stallings, who was originally drafted by the Angels out of Tennessee and then was sent to the Orioles in the Jose Iglesias trade, if you remember that one that came after the 2020 season. Stallings worked his way up to AAA Norfolk, and he's been in Norfolk for, almost 2 years now, just has not been able to break through to the big leagues. He was not on the 40-man roster. He was kind of pitching worse this year, 27 innings for the Tide. Stalling had a 5.67 ERA. He was never a big strikeout guy. He was always a command guy, but he walked 13 batters in 27 innings this year. The stuff was, not a super high velocity fastball. He had some solid breaking pitches, but his command has actually gotten worse after he was kind of the I don't walk anybody, I don't strike out a lot of guys, I get ground balls kind of guy. And it just became clear that although he was nice depth to have in AAA, there was really never going to be a path for Garrett Stallings to get to the big leagues or make an impact with the Orioles. So it seemed like a worthwhile trade to give up on Stallings and get Vieira in a guy who, could help your major league bullpen. And as you've seen, teams have tried on Vieira, right? The Mariners, who initially signed him out of Brazil in 2010 as an amateur free agent. The White Sox tried. Teams in Japan tried. The Brewers tried. And the Orioles are doing the Arrested Development meme, but it might work for us. And the first outing, let's be clear, did not work, right? The Orioles got him into what should have been the easiest spot to make your Orioles debut. He gets activated to the roster. The Orioles are winning 11-0 in the 8th inning against the Red Sox on Monday. In comes Vieira. We're up 11-0 in the 8th. So low stress. Hey, even if you give up a run, you look a little shaky, it's fine. Just get us through the 8th inning. That was your job, no matter how you do it. That did not happen. Vieira walks the first 3 batters to load the bases. Some of his pitches weren't necessarily very close to the strike zone. Then he finally comes into the strike zone and allows a 3-run triple, then walks the next batter and is pulled out of the game. Faced 5 batters, 4 walks, and a triple, and did not record an out. Luckily, Cionel Perez came in, got out of the jam. The Orioles still won the game easily, 11-3 on Monday, but it was not a great first showing from Vieira. And that kind of brings up the first part of Thyago Vieira, in that he's always had some command problems. He had some with the Brewers this year. He had some in the minor leagues. It's always been the reason why he's never turned into a really good major league reliever. He sometimes has no idea where the ball is going. Now, to be fair, that was, with the Orioles, without a doubt, the worst outing of his big league career. So you can look at it like this. He's still on the roster. He's probably going to pitch this weekend against the Rays. It can only go up from here, right? That's one way to look at it. Now, in terms of the stuff for Vieira, it is a sinker, slider, 4-seam fastball, and changeup mix for the right-hander. The sinker this year, he throws 54% of the time, throws it at 97. Doesn't give up a crazy amount of hard contact against it, gets some ground balls. It's kind of his go-to fastball. Then he has a slider that he throws 38% of the time. It's at 88 miles an hour. It has a good whiff rate, it gets some swings and misses. But man, when they square it up, that slider goes far. A 758 slugging percentage by opposing batters against Vieira's slider this year. A -6 run value via StatCast. It has just not been a good slider. The Orioles need to alter that breaking ball in some way, make it more of a slurve, make it more of a sweeper, make it a tighter slider, have him throw it harder, something, because whatever he's throwing with the slider is not working right now. But the pitch that intrigues me is the 4-seam fastball. So he only throws it 8% of the time, but it's at 98 miles an hour on average, and he can run it up easily to 100 and above. And while he hasn't thrown it a lot this year, opponents are hitting just 125 against it. It's got a 33% whiff rate, which is really elite for a 4-seam fastball. And it used to be his main pitch when he was in the big leagues the first time with the Mariners and the White Sox before he went to Japan. Vieira's number 1 pitch was his 4-seamer. He used it like he uses his sinker now, over 50% of the time. But when he came back to the big leagues with Milwaukee, he became more of a sinker guy. And that was probably the doing of the Brewers for bringing him back over here. But the 4-seamer, to me, seems like his best pitch. I think the Orioles will see the life he has on that pitch, the velocity he has on that pitch. And I think the O's are going to have him throw that pitch more. And that came to fruition in Monday's outing. I know it's hard to take anything positive from what happened in that appearance, but he threw 9 4-seamers on Monday. And you're thinking, Connor, why do I care about a guy throwing 9 4-seam fastballs when he walked 4 batters and gave up a 3-run triple and left the game? Well, he had not thrown more than 4 4-seamers in any outing this year with the Brewers, and then he throws 9 of them in his first one with the O's. That tells me right there, the Orioles told him, hey, your 4-seamer's good, throw it more. I think we're going to see less sinkers, less sliders. The four-seamer is going to take up what's left of the sinker and slider. And then the other thing that we may see is the changeup. Now, the big thing with his four-seam fastball is 32% of his strikeouts this year, essentially 6 of the strikeouts that he's thrown, about a third of them, have come on the four-seam fastball, yet he only throws it 8% of the time. So what that tells you is he can hunt a strikeout with that pitch. So why not throw it more? And it's not like you're asking him to throw like a weird pitch, like a slurve or a splitter all the time. It's a four-seam fastball. It's everybody's number one pitch. They're going to have him throw it more. And the other thing is the changeup. Now, he's always thrown a changeup. It's always been his number 4 pitch. StatCast has him marked as having thrown only one changeup this year with the Brewers. But if you watch some of the video from Vieira like I did, it seems like a lot of his changeups get categorized as fastballs because his changeup sits at like 92 miles an hour. It doesn't have a lot of crazy break. It just kind of runs down and away from left-handers, but it is a good pitch. The Orioles love a changeup. I think we're going to see more four-seam changeup as the Orioles begin to work with him. And listen, the stuff is there. He's just got to find that command, and he will. Every outing he throws with the O's will be better than the one Monday. I'll tell you that because it can't get any worse than what he did on Monday. Literally. I mean, no manager is going to leave a reliever in longer to do more damage than Vieira did Monday. So it literally can't get any worse. I don't think it'll get better from here. And if it keeps being bad, you know what? They didn't give up much for him. They will DFA him and they will find another reliever to put in that spot, or they'll eventually trade for someone at the deadline to upgrade the bullpen. Again, it's a low risk, high reward move. The O's have done a bunch of them. Some of them have worked out, which has been great. And the ones that didn't work out, it didn't hurt the O's at all. This move falls into that category again, but I am intrigued to see what the O's can do because I'm pretty certain they're going to change up that pitch mix a little bit and go to more four-seamer and change up. But that was the big news of the week that I had missed. Just a few more things to get to, a few DFAs, some roster move things that I had missed over the past week or so to get to finish off the pod. That is coming up next. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is also brought to you by Stitch Fix. Do you know that like instant confidence boost you get from an outfit that makes you look really good? That's kind of what I felt a little bit at my wedding on Sunday, but that's what I get also with Stitch Fix. Stitch Fix, they just help you easily upgrade your wardrobe with a professional stylist that helps you find new on-trend favorites that work just for you. You give the stylist your size, style, and budget, and then you order boxes when you want them, how you want them. There's no subscription required. You don't have to like get something every month. You don't have to keep paying. You just get 5 pieces, and then you try them on. You look at them. You say, I like these 3. You keep them. The other 2, you send them back. It is certainly that easy. And the shipping, the returns, the exchanges, they're all always free. So get style that makes you feel as good as you look. Get started today at stitchfix.com/MLB and get $20 off your first fix. That's stitchfix.com/MLB for $20 off. Stitchfix.com/MLB. Must redeem within 7 days of sign up. So just a couple more Orioles news and notes to get to here right at the end of a Friday podcast before we get into the weekend. Orioles did make one other roster move while I was gone. That was Caleb Ort, the right-hander who the Orioles had claimed off waivers over the winter, and he did have options and started him in the AAA Norfolk bullpen to begin the year. It had not gone well. 12 2/3 innings for the Tides, 12.08 ERA, 21 hits, 16 strikeouts to 10 walks and 2 homers. He had been abysmal. And the Orioles were done with Caleb Ort. They quietly tried to pass him through waivers. It did not work. He was claimed by the Houston Astros, and he is now with Houston in their AAA affiliate. So the Orioles now do have an open spot on their 40-man roster with Ort gone, but I mentioned it a couple of weeks ago on the pod, I think, when I was talking about the relief options the Orioles have in AAA. Like, I basically said, hey, Caleb Ort's been so bad, he's probably the next player to get DFA'd, and that is what happened. Caleb Ort is off the roster. Now, speaking of DFAs, of course, the Orioles did that to Ryan McKenna a few weeks ago when Austin Hayes returned to the roster from injury, and McKenna was subsequently claimed off waivers by the San Francisco Giants. Now, I mentioned at the time that, listen, the Giants were so injured, they just needed healthy bodies in the outfield. they claim McKenna. He started one game, he came off the bench for a few more. He was with the Giants for 10 days. He went 0 for 6 with 4 strikeouts at the plate. And then he is gone as well. The San Francisco Giants have now DFA'd Ryan McKenna. He is in waiver limbo again. I don't think the Orioles would claim him or bring him back, but never say never. And if he does clear waivers and elect to become a free agent, I would not be surprised in the slightest if the Orioles brought him back in on a minor league deal and stuck him back in AAA Norfolk to just provide outfield depth again. But we will keep an eye on that to see if McKenna does get claimed by another team. Another guy who was DFA'd by the Orioles this year is Tyler Nevin, who almost made the Orioles opening day roster, but instead was DFA'd. He was claimed by the Athletics, and the A's gave him a solid amount of playing time. 140 plate appearances. Nevin hit 220 with a 307 on base, 341 slugging percentage. That's a 90 OPS plus. He was hitting the ball harder than ever, wasn't striking out a ton, was walking a little bit. 724 OPS against lefties wasn't bad, but the Athletics decided to DFA Tyler Nevin earlier this week as well. And again, just like Ryan McKenna, I don't think the Orioles have plans to claim Tyler Nevin, but if this Jordan Westburg hit by pitch, which seems okay, x-rays were negative, got the day off Wednesday, it seems like the Orioles are going to try to get him in the lineup tonight against the Rays. But if for some reason Westburg takes a turn for the worse with that wrist, right-handed hitting third baseman and Tyler Nevin that the Orioles know is out there. If Westburg had to go on the IL, wouldn't be surprised if they brought Nevin back. Otherwise, though, again, we'll keep an eye on it. Tyler Nevin just seems to be a really good guy, and I hope he gets another chance in the big leagues. And then the final former Oriole to be DFA'd this week was the story that kind of took over baseball on Thursday night, and that is Jorge Lopez, who has been pitching out of the New York Mets bullpen this year. And it's been a while since Jorge Lopez was in the spotlight in Major League Baseball. He certainly is now. Lopez this year with the Mets has been fine. 26 in the third innings, 3.76 ERA. His 43% ground ball rate is actually a career low. He's not really striking guys out. He's walking a few too many guys, but ERA has still been solid on the year. But he was ejected on a Wednesday game against the Dodgers. He'd given up a home run to Ohtani. Then there was a check swing while he was pitching against Freddie Freeman. He thought it was a swing. Third base umpire Ramon DeJesus called it no swing. Lopez started yelling at DeJesus. DeJesus then ejected Lopez. Mind you, the Mets were down 9-3. Lopez pitching in the top of the 8th of a blowout game. They eject Jorge Lopez. He's screaming back at DeJesus. He finally comes off the field. He untucks his jersey. He takes his glove off and throws his glove into the stands at Citi Field before exiting down into the tunnel. It was a tough moment for Jorge Lopez. And then there were the comments after the game, which caused a whole snafu as well. Initially, it was reported when about an hour after Lopez had been ejected, the game was over. He was speaking to the media in the clubhouse, still in full uniform. It was first reported that Lopez had basically said, "I'm on the worst effing team ever." And that people, I mean, rightfully so, did not take well that he's calling out his team for being the worst effing team ever. Then Lopez clarified and did so on his Instagram account on Thursday morning, did so through a public statement as well and through the media, basically saying that English is not his first language, and it is not. It is his second language, and said what he was saying was, "I'm the worst effing teammate ever, not the worst effing team ever." And pretty close there, but this is also on the people who were there covering that moment to make sure they got exactly what Lopez said, and they clearly did not. This is also a reason why a lot of English is not their first language, even if they have pretty good English, prefer to use a interpreter, because it just makes sure the words come out as cleanly and as precisely as they would like to. This is one of the reasons why. Not a great job by the Mets to not give him the interpreter if he needed it, but all in all, it was still kind of a not a great move to chuck your glove into the stands. And Lopez said, I won't be surprised if I'm, put on waivers if I'm cut today. And that is what happened on Thursday morning. The Mets made it official, DFAing Jorge Lopez. And there's a lot that goes into this situation, right? I mean, as Orioles fans, Lopez, who made an all-star team here in Baltimore as the team's closer in 2022 before he was traded to the Twins that year, there's a lot else that goes on in his life. His son, who just turned 11, like it was his birthday on Wednesday, that probably played a role in all of this. Shout out to friend of the show, Jake Mintz, who wrote a great story about all of this over at Yahoo Sports on Thursday. Go check that one out. But essentially, listen, his son has a lot of medical issues. has to go in for countless doctor visits and surgeries, and it is a lot on him and his family. That is always weighing on his mind. It was always weighing on his mind as an Oriole. He had to take a mental health break on the injured list when he was with the Twins last year because of a lot of that going on, and just you feel for Jorge Lopez. Now, you don't want to be throwing your glove into the stands. Like, I'm not condoning that at all, but you can understand where he's coming from, and you can understand the reactions he's having. And another great part of Jake's story was he said he talked to like 30 people who know Jorge Lopez, and a lot of them basically said this is an amazing person who just sometimes struggles to deal with failure and lets his emotions get the best of him sometime. And that's basically what I felt like we saw Thursday in New York. And now he is on waivers, and I don't know if another team's going to pick him up, at least for the time being. And maybe he will need some time away from baseball to be with his family. But the Orioles did bring him back late last year after the Marlins released him. He was struggling with them. Did give up 7 runs in 12 innings, but struck out 14 and walked 2. The stuff looked pretty good. The results weren't amazing for Jorge Lopez. And it seems like if Jorge is going to pitch in the big leagues, when he's been in his best place for his family, for his career, it's seemingly been in his stints with the Orioles. So it's like, I hope for him, if he wants to be in Baltimore, that the O's could work it out. They could use a little bullpen help. Thyago Vieira spot, Keegan Aiken spot, both of them could be up for grabs in this Oriole bullpen right now. Why not Jorge Lopez? Why not put a claim on him on waivers? It may not happen, but I just hope for Jorge Lopez he can find some clarity, some relief. He's talked about how he is continuing to go to therapy, he is continuing to work on his mental health. Obviously, all this stuff in his family life with his son weighs on him every single day. And I just hope for Jorge that he can find, slivers of hope, slivers of happiness in his day. I know this is going to be one of his darker moments as a Major League Baseball player. I know he'll learn from. I know he has already owned up to the mistakes he made on the field and after the game. And I just wish the best for Jorge Lopez. I've always rooted for the guy. We'll continue to root for the guy and hope, even if it's not with the Orioles, he can find another big league job in a good organization, in a good spot for him, where he can continue to juggle just the life with his son and, of course, his life on the baseball field as well. But that'll do it for today's episode. Thank you so much for tuning in. Orioles got the Rays this weekend after a day off on Thursday. It is at the Yard. Orioles and Rays, the first time the O's will play the Rays this year. Rays have been a little disappointing this season. 28-29 on the year, just barely found a way to win a series at home against the Athletics this week. They have not been playing very good baseball. Aaron Savali gets the ball for the Rays tonight in a 7:05 game 1. He has not been good this year, a 5+ ERA. Albert Suarez on the other side against him. On Saturday, it's a 4:00 start. Kyle Bradish, coming off 7 no-hit innings, will face the Rays against the rookie Taj Bradley with a 3.13 ERA on the season. He's going to throw a lot of high fastballs, but the O's have seen him before. And then finally on Sunday, 1:35, Cole Irvin will look to continue his dominance against Zach Littell, who is the latest just incredible work of the Rays pitching development. He was like a random middle reliever, and they turned into one of their best starters. Littell has a 3.03 ERA on the season, been in the rotation all year for the Rays. And then I will be back on Monday recapping everything you need to know in this series between the Orioles and the Tampa Bay Rays. But until then, I'm Connor Newcomb, and this has been the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.